Hello class, welcome to our lesson today from section 6.2. This is dealing with trigonometric equations. This will kind of be a blast from the past. I always like kind of ending with trigonometric equations because it takes everything full circle with things like degrees and radians and how to solve equations as you go one time around the circle for your trig function. So I've kind of split this up into a few different lessons. We're going to focus on just solving for the variable in this first group. And let's go ahead and get started with ones that are from 0 to 2 pi. So what you'll notice in all these questions when they say to solve the function, they're typically going to be either from 0 to 2 pi or from 0 to 360. In general, 0 to 2 pi equations are exact value situations. So like think 30, 60, 90, 45, 45, 90, those types of situations. If the directions have 0 to 360 degrees, it's probably plug it into your calculator and do the inverse feature of it and then find the second one using your triangles and all students take calculus or the unit circle. So for this question, it says cosine of x equals 1/2. I'm just going to draw a quick reference triangle in some of these. So if it's 1/2 from this angle, that would be this is the adjacent of 1 and the hypotenuse is 2. That means the opposite is root 3 because this is a 30, 60, 90. The important thing is you need to know what the reference angle is. And the reference angle then would be 60 degrees. Then the other thing is cosine, where is it positive? It's positive in quadrant 1 and 4. And that idea is going to be central to any success in this section, regardless of if you use your calculator or not, because your calculator does not find the second answer. So the first answer is going to be just 60 degrees. The reference angle in quadrant 1 is going to be its own angle. And then in quadrant 4, remember in quadrant 4, it's found by taking 360 minus the reference angle, and that would be 300. I can convert that to radians by doing times pi over 180, or knowing that 60 is pi over 3, and then 300 would be 5 times that number at 5 pi over 3. The next one says sine of x is negative root 3 over 2. If I'm going reference angle route and exact value, I'm going to ignore the negative sign for now and make sure that I know opposite is root 3 and hypotenuse is 2. What that would find then is that my reference angle is, again, 60 degrees. But since sine is negative in quadrants 3 and 4, the reference angle of 60 in quadrant 3 would be found, or can give you the actual answer by taking 180 plus that reference angle of 2 and make it 240. Or in quadrant 4 would be 360 minus the reference angle of 60, and that would be 300 times pi over 180 to get 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. That could also be found by taking the reference angle of 60 degrees or pi over 3 and multiplying by 4 and multiplying by 5 in order to get 4 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3 as your final answers for one time around the circle. The next one is tangent of x equals 1. If you get a whole number, don't forget you can always put it over 1 and make it a fraction if needed. This would be a reference angle of 45 because 1 over 1 would be opposite and adjacent. Tangent is positive in quadrant 1, so that's the easy answer of 45 degrees. And then the second answer is in quadrant 3, and that's found by taking 180 plus 45, which is 225. This reference angle of 45 degrees would be pi over 4. Times 5 would be 5 pi over 4, and that would give you your two answers as you go around the circle for this equation of tangent of x equals 1. Okay, the next one is cosecant of x. I would automatically just switch it to sine, cosine, or tangent. Most students are way more comfortable with that, so that makes sine of x equals 1/2. That would represent a 30-degree reference angle because the opposite is 1 this time, as opposed to the one a couple slides ago that had a reference angle of 60, but the opposite was root 3. So essentially those two sides, the opposite and adjacent, just switch, and now that makes the reference angle 30 degrees. Sine is positive in quadrants 1 and 2, so that's found, your first angle is just the reference angle, so that's just 30 degrees, or pi over 6. The second angle in quadrant 2, remember, is always found by taking 180 minus the reference angle of, in this case, of 30, and that would be 150, and that would give you 5 pi over 6 by taking either 30 times 5 to get 150, or just multiply by pi over 180, and that will also get you 5 pi over 6. Okay, the next one looks a little bit different because it's not just like sine of x equals. Well, you just make it look like that. You'll notice I use theta this time instead of x. That's irrelevant. It's just solve for the variable. You have to get that by itself, though. So add 1 to the other side and divide by 2. That would be sine of theta equals 1/2. And that's actually the exact same as this last slide. So I found sine of x equals 1/2, sine of theta equaling 1/2 would be the exact same scenario. And so I'd find that in the exact same way. And then my answer would still be pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. These steps are exactly the same from the last slide. Okay, the next one has cosine of x, tangent of x equals cosine of x. First step, if there's more than one trig function, probably set it equal to 0. Think of it like a factoring question. So if you set it equal to 0, and then you're going to factor out what you can from both of them, in this case that would be a cosine of x. So I take cosine of x and put it out front, and that leaves me with tangent of x minus 1. Now this is just like factoring when we did like quadratics in algebra 2, for example. So you set both of those just equal to 0 individually, and then solve for each one of them. So the first one is cosine of x equals 0. Two methods to find that scenario. One is the unit circle, figure out where the x value is 0. That would be up at 90 or down at 270. Other option is use the cosine graph, and that would give you the same thing. At 90 degrees and 270 is when cosine of x hits the x-axis. And that would be 90 and 270, and I switch that to radians. Remember, pi over 2 is 90, times 3 would be 270. Okay, one of those two options are probably your best bet in order to figure out where cosine of x equals 0. The other one is tangent of x minus 1 equals 0. I add 1 to the other side. Now I have tangent of x equals 1. That should be the same pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4 from the question we looked right here. Okay, so this would be the exact same situation and solution, so the work is on this slide here to figure out where tangent of x equals 1. What you'll notice here is instead of 2 answers, I have 4 answers. I have 2 for the first equation of cosine of x equals 0, and 2 for the second equation of tangent of x minus 1 equals 0. In general, you're going to have 2 answers for each piece. The only scenario where you may not have 2 answers is when it's sine or cosine equals 1, because that's only going to be at 0 or maybe 180, or if it's cosine is going to be, or excuse me, if it's sine, maybe it's at 90 or 270. Every other situation is going to have 2 answers, so you want to make sure, regardless of if you're plugging things into a calculator, you got to be able to find the second answer no matter what in those situations. Okay, for this next one, I got to get sine of x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 3 from the 4 and get 1. Divide by negative 2, that gives me sine equals negative 1/2. If I'm using the reference angle approach, that's going to be a 30-degree reference. I'm going to ignore the negative sign for now, because all I have to know is what the reference angle is, and so the opposite is 1, hypotenuse is 2. And then in quadrant 3, I find that by taking 180 plus the reference, and that would be 210. In quadrant 3, I take 360 minus the reference, and that would be 330. And then my 2 answers, 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6, can be found by taking 30 times 7 and 11, which would be pi over 6 times 7 and 11, or taking 210 and 310 multiplied by pi over 180, and that would also get you an acceptable answer of the 7 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. And again, I know I'm going through this fairly quickly because I've looked at this for a long time and be able to find those answers a lot. But when you're dealing with these situations, what you want to focus in on is isolate the sine trig function first. And then use the reference angles. You know it's going to be a reference angle situation, so look for your 30, 60, 90s, 45, 45, 90s. Maybe those quadrantial angles like the one that was cosine equals 0, and use those to help find your solutions for those situations. We'll look more at this in our next lesson, dealing with a little bit more complicated versions. My recommendation is probably starting the homework a little bit earlier to make sure you're finding the 2 answers as you go around the circle correctly. And I think that'll help you as you move forward. Have a good day, everyone.